Right, let's jump straight in. Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're taking a magnifying glass to a cultural myth you probably know like the back of your hand. We're actually going to deconstruct it, looking at a deeply researched paper called The Primordial Rebel and the Prophetic Taunt. And trust me, this is going to challenge a narrative that has literally shaped Western theology for centuries. Seriously, think about it for a second. Where does the devil's actual backstory come from? You'd probably assume that the epic, sweeping tale of Satan falling from heaven before the dawn of creation is laid out step by step right there in the Old Testament. But as we're about to see, when you closely examine the source texts, they reveal something entirely different. The ancient authors were up to something far more subversive. It's honestly wild how much of our modern understanding hangs on just one translation choice. We often read passages in Isaiah and Ezekiel as these ancient, hidden biographies of the devil, but that specific reading is heavily anchored by the Latin Vulgate's translation of a Hebrew phrase into Lucifer, which at the time simply meant light bearer or morning star. But over time, Lucifer morphed from a descriptive title into a proper name, and that completely shifted how billions of people read the text. But, okay. Here's the crucial reality check. When we actually look at the ancient genre and the cosmological background, these texts aren't a secret pre-creation biography at all. They are highly charged, intensely political, prophetic taunts aimed directly at human kings, specifically the rulers of Babylon and Tyre. The prophets are mocking earthly arrogance by comparing these guys to an older, widely known myth about a divine council rebel. To really grasp how these prophetic taunts work, we first need to decode the Genesis serpent. We've basically got to completely rethink the antagonist in Eden. The original Hebrew word used for the serpent is nachash, and it is brilliantly functioning as a triple entendre. It means a serpent, yes, but it also means to divine or deceive, and it translates as the shining one. The text isn't pointing to a literal zoological python slithering in the grass, it's pointing to a luminous, divining member of the heavenly council. And that absolutely flips the script. The antagonist in Eden was a serpentine, radiant throne guardian. He belongs to the exact same category of supernatural beings as the burning, winged seraphim that we see guarding God's throne later in Isaiah 6. They are these luminous, serpentine divine beings. The tragic difference here? The seraphim used their high position to worship, while the nachash used his to deceive. And you know what? This actually solves a massive mystery. Have you ever wondered why Eve wasn't completely freaked out when a serpent just started talking to her? Well, it's because Eden wasn't just a terrestrial park. It was the holy mountain where the divine assembly met. Eve wasn't shocked because a shining divine being is exactly who belongs in that sacred space. His crime wasn't trespassing. It was a devastating betrayal from the inside. Now let's look at how Isaiah weaponizes this prophecy in his taunt against Babylon. Fast forward a few centuries to Isaiah 14. The text literally calls this passage a mashal. That means it's a taunt poem using a comparative analogy. Isaiah is essentially looking right at the incredibly arrogant king of Babylon and saying, "Oh, you think you're a god? Let me remind you what happened to the last divine being who tried to take over." It is a devastating political takedown, not a hidden history book. Notice how Isaiah maps out the king's arrogance with these 5 escalating I will statements. I will ascend to heaven, raise my throne above the stars, sit on the mount of assembly, ascend above the clouds, and make myself like the Most High. This isn't just your run-of-the-mill generic pride. This is a highly specific council-level usurpation. He is explicitly trying to claim the absolute highest seat in the heavenly hierarchy. So when this rebel says he's going to raise his throne above the stars of God, we've really got to put on our ancient lenses. He's not talking about flaming balls of gas burning billions of light years away. In ancient Near Eastern cosmology, stars and divine beings were completely interchangeable concepts. Both were viewed as luminous entities ruling in the heavens. And the Hebrew Bible backs this up perfectly. Take a look at the phrasing in Job, where God asks Job where he was when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. The poetry equates them flawlessly. Morning stars and sons of God are exactly the same category of luminous, divine beings. So, to rise above the stars literally means to forcefully rule over the other council members. Which brings us right to Ezekiel's anointed guardian cherub.
Ezekiel 28 uses the exact same literary playbook, but this time targeting the insanely wealthy prince of Tyre by comparing him to an anointed guardian cherub. Now, some traditional readings try to argue this figure is just a perfect human, kind of like Adam before the fall, mainly because of the priestly gemstones mentioned, but the text explicitly calls him a cherub. And throughout the entire biblical canon, a cherub is always a fiery supernatural divine being, never human. Ezekiel is undeniably invoking a divine council member.
When you conceptually stack the texts of Isaiah and Ezekiel side by side, this incredible 3D picture emerges. Isaiah places the rebel on the Mount of Assembly in the north. Ezekiel places his cherub in Eden, the holy mountain of God. So what's the underlying reality? Isaiah's Mount of Assembly and Ezekiel's Eden are describing the exact same cosmic geography, just from two different angles. They're both describing the sacred headquarters of the divine council. Both prophets are using this beautiful, tragic, poetic symmetry. The divine rebel's hyper-ambitious ascent, clawing for the very top of the mountain, is met with a catastrophic descent. He's cast down to Sheol in Isaiah, and cast to the ground to eat dust in Genesis and Ezekiel. These are all ancient cosmic metaphors for being exiled from the divine mountain and thrown straight down into the underworld. All right, let's tie this all together with the canonical reveal. Okay, this naturally brings up a pretty massive question. If Isaiah and Ezekiel are really just taunting human kings, when does the devil actually enter the picture? The sequence of events clears this up perfectly. God's revelation unfolds progressively. The Old Testament definitely presents a rebellious, luminous divine council member, but his full identity as the ultimate, personal adversary isn't totally laid out in Genesis. He is only explicitly identified by the title Satan centuries later. It actually isn't until the very end of the whole thing, in the New Testament book of Revelation, that the ancient serpent from Genesis is definitively named as Satan. And here's the real twist. Revelation ties his ultimate, definitive fall from the heavenly assembly directly to the birth, death, and enthronement of the Messiah in the first century, not to some invisible event before the creation of the universe. This is exactly why how we read matters so much. If we take a fully baked first-century New Testament theology about Satan and just kind of forcefully paste it backward into the poetic taunts of Isaiah and Ezekiel, we're making a mistake. Doing that completely erases the nuanced, progressive literary tradition that the ancient Hebrew authors were intentionally building over centuries. It just flattens the whole text. So we're left with this completely fascinating paradigm shift. If we actually let these ancient texts speak for themselves within their own cosmological worldview, the story they tell is far more complex and politically subversive than the simple cultural myths we've inherited. It really forces us to ask, if this cosmic conflict isn't just some ancient prologue, but an ongoing rebellion that earthly powers are actively participating in right now, how does that change the way you read your Bible tomorrow?